Yeah, so we'll move on to Pierre Alexandre Tremblay, who's joining us to talk about the FluCoMa project. So Pierre Alexandre is a professor at the University of Huddersfield, who's been doing lots of research very much in the area of music and HCI, and has a strong background in performance. I think the first time I encountered you was maybe 2007, playing in London with bass and live electronics.
Still going strong.
Yeah, and that perspective seems to be a big part of the work in FluCoMa.
It
Yeah,
is
so
indeed,
we also have Owen Green here still, who's from the FluCoMa project.
which is
Um,
frightening for me, but should be enjoyable for him to take the piss a bit later or complement and answer questions with me at the end, since I will link to many of his ideas throughout. Let me just share my screen. You should see green, like gray stuff now, and a title. So I wanted to thank you all for inviting me and being present. It's very humbling to present. Sorry for the French Canadian accent. I'm still learning the British ways after 17 years. In what is an involved case study right now, a tale from the trail. And it's a bit humbling to present to you a bunch of specialists. So you might have heard of the Fluid Corpus Manipulation a little, or FluCoMa for his awful acronym, in various ways. I will showcase some. So you might have seen gigs of see stuff online. You might have seen some tutorial online of Catard style sample browser in Max, or maybe a kind of Wekinator style regressor synth control in Super Collider, or in your favorite Creative Code environment, seen a package, or started to open up the tool set in your favorite environment and see some sort of poke at the code, you poke at the help file, and or maybe you have not done any of this, but you read one Twitter about a podcast or a case study, or we've explained some concepts on our learning platform. Some of your students might have linked to those. We hope that you've managed to find a way to engage with our thing. You might even have Googled something and fall on our forum from some strange questions about people trying to do stuff, or fell onto the GitHub. Who knows? Maybe you've done that. And the question is, you might have is what is actually FluCoMa? What is this thing going? And what is it? Is it all of that? It's a good question. None of it is FluCoMa, or actually all of it is in part. It's the fruit of our interdisciplinary research in some sort of interface design over the last 5 years. So what were we trying to do? But there was a driving artistic question at the core of this, which, if you refuse the kind of God sends inspiration to a composer, usually white male privilege, giving that to performers to compose, model of making music, and you're much more into a kind of dirty hand vision, much more democratic and much more historically and across various divides accurate way of making music, where you have some kind of sound and material somehow. And on the other side, you have stuff you do with that material. And in effect, you have a feedback loop between giving sense to that material and then exploring through kind of other ways of knowledge. Um, the question is like, why would you place a machine in this loop? And where would you place it and how to? That's a very generic question. But if we think about the title of the project, Fluid Corpus Manipulation, like how do you deal with large bunch of sound? And another question was, once you start to dig about what's happening, you have an interface that you design and you teach. And on the other hand, people are learning the tools and using the tools. And again, there's a big feedback loop. That's not rocket science for any of you, but sometimes it's easy to forget when we design tools that people will actually use them, and they might not be open to all our suggestions. They might bring with their cognitive grooves, interests, pressures, and priorities. So this, again, was a big driving question. So what was the sub-subject that we did? But obviously we were trying to bring a toolbox for programmatic data mining that is aimed at sound corpora, large sound banks, integrating some tools of machine listening and machine learning in Max, Super Collider, and Pure Data. That's very concrete now. And there's a reason for that, which we will discover. But just giving tools to people is not really empowering for real. It's putting a lot of pressure on people. So obviously trying to bring people to a critical discussion implies to teach, to pass on knowledge, because knowledge is power, and to give them a platform where they can actually discuss and challenge these assumptions, both of the tool set and of the knowledge. So we have a forum, and thank you for the ERC to have funded our lives for the last 5 years. It's been very useful to be able to go in depth in this, and that we'll try to present this, what is a very interdisciplinary research of engineer and musician trying to work together to solve these solutions, trying to avoid the service relationship in either way, if we want to quote Georgie Bourne, and while trying to acknowledge each people's specialty and priorities, which often will be conflicting. So what I've decided to do for you today is to talk about the past, the present, and the future, 3 moments in 3 papers and their consequences on the project. So we have a kind of overview of 5 years of research, which is in effect just the appetizer for Owen's presentation of next week at PPIG. So it's a big introduction for Owen's paper. So the past, the paper we'll cover is a paper that was early in the project, which once I had the kind of delusional project making and got the funding, I hired 2 fantastic co-researchers who I asked explicitly to challenge everything in the project. And obviously I learned a lot from Owen and Girard. And this is the kind of fruit that distill the essence, the good bits of the research project. And I'll cover those with you. And you can read the paper in full if you're interested in the nuances. We have little time for that. But one of the idea that I very like, and again, it's nothing new for people like you working in HCI, but maybe it's worth reminding us on a regular basis, is that ID is complicated. Interdisciplinarity is really complicated. Software design is complicated. Integration within already striving communities of practice, that, to gel a sub-community across the Max users, the PD users, the Super Collider users, is also complicated. And all of it is incredibly biased. So we wanted to be at least transparent with our biases, plural, and this is our step in that direction. So one of the concept that I really like, and that's an Owen slide, where the classic software community of practice and the beautiful and linear knowledge of knowledge mappings that use the fantasized user and engineering will have could do, or the musician having the ultimate understanding from an engineer that will code. That's actually not what's happening in real life, and it's much more fluffy. So I like tentacles, and this is what we talked about, being human. Another idea I really liked in that paper is a few manifestos. So the first one is that we're building extension, not replacement. Why do we do that? But if we want people to come in as specialists, musician, composers, into a critical thinking, we need to enable them in a situation where we facilitate critical power. And therefore, we need to extend what they already know instead of just giving them a whole new world in which we could bias their thinking. Another one is that we consider artifact as ear training. Obviously, if you are a big company that sells a denoiser algorithm, you're gonna, at lots of money, you will optimize the algorithm to deliver all the time. That's what you sell. But good music, if we think of glitch or guitar amps or a lot of vocoders, lots of music starts to sound good when you use and abuse its artifact. And for that, you need to enable people to use and have access to these. Another bias was that we thought that the echo chamber of the privileged white male coding Max in academia was really well represented in our community, but there were other people that might have other things. And it's interesting, there's a lot of groups out there online which have other types of profile, which could bring interesting new set of questions or perspective on the same question. So in the beauty of trying to give some kicks, we have some mottos. So musicking is humaning, imperfection is material, hearing is practice, and interface is identity. They were very important to remind us when we had conflicts about interface design, to remember the higher agendas. And finally, another idea that I like very much is this idea of techno fluency as a disposition, not just an ability. So if you are thinking about what people can do, on one side you have like composers who have incredible fluency within a DAW, thinking about music in a very linear manner, maybe but coding plugins and stuff. And on the other side, you have like a kind of person who designs their own environment. Let's say Miller Pocket on one side and Robert Normando on the other side. But in between, you have various levels of people who understand how to code for music. And what is usually the assumption in computer science, especially, is that you go from a high level to low level as you get wiser and more intelligent. But what we discovered first is that it's a relatively macho approach to the subject, but also that within the composer's or musician workflow, there are moments. So somebody could be able to extend with a few C++ object, max MSP, but while it's time to actually do their instruments, they don't want to go back into composing. But even more, they might be able to do that and not want to touch at all any coding while it's time to do the music. Not that it's not going to be cross-influencing, it's going to bounce around, but these are dispositions which might vary within the same person's musicking practice. So I like the fact that it's a flat ontology, and I also like the fact that within one person can experiment multiple states. So these were driving things. And the last constraint we put on ourselves is thinking of it as an ecosystem. We know we're not the new one. We're maybe the newest kids on the block, but there's plenty of people who do these things, and many of people will do these things, thinking about creative coding. So what do we have as a solution? But on the one hand, you had like closed box ideas who were doing similar approach, Catard, AudioStellar, Wikinator. And on the other side, you had like the kind of lower level coding toolbox, but neither of those respond to the kind of flexibility and design criteria and research that is done at creative coding level that Max Supercloud and Pure Data embodied and work on. So we thought that we could put ourselves in the middle there, but instead of fighting against anyone, we thought that it could be an interesting way to use FluCoMa as a bridge between these things. And that again will have very clear consequences on our interface design throughout the years. Obviously, there's the FTM UBU and SCMIR that existed, but for other reasons, maybe didn't fulfill our design criteria. So that created this huge amount of items, and there's more items, and all of them are in real time, but most of them are in real time and non-real time. We've used buffers and dictionaries to enable people coming in and out of other environment, and within the environment, other sub tool sets. So these were very important for us. All of that leads us 5 years. I'm just going to jump. I'm going to explain those 5 years, but to the present. So what is happening right now? So that was the past, the beginning, the ambitions. How did we get there? We just got a paper published in the Computer Music Journal, which explains the arrival point and a bit of the methodology, but I will unfold some of it for you right now. And don't worry if you need the reference, I can give them later and the slides as well. So the original plan of the methodology was to create 2 toolboxes, 4 commissions for the first one with 3 plenary and a gig, a second toolbox, more machine learning, and then 4 more commissions to road test, and then 2 more plenaries, and then another gig, and then we do an optimization pass, and then magic, we have a community. That was the plan. And why did they fund this? They were probably on a good mood that day, but that sounded like it was a sound plan. In effect, what happened is that we discovered that Pure Data was missing, and in terms of enabling different communities, that was a good one. The command line was probably a good idea. So we built a first learn protocol for that right from the outset to be able for people to get learning and get critical. We had a lot more than 4 commissions because people started to be eager with the first tool set. And we did not 3 plenary, but 2 plus a booting, a coding boot camp where we were able to get direct feedback on first and second assumptions on interface. Finally, the second toolbox, we had to scrap the first learning, did a second one. We started to have weekly geekeries, and a lot more people started to join, but there was this COVID thing that happened. Nobody from the first tool set decided to stop. Like we had 3 people sticking around, plus some of the keynote speakers. So it was quite interesting to have very different types of people. And then, I think all of you have done some coding, know about refactoring. You always think it's going to be quick and efficient if you've not done it, like me. But then some people who've done it will know that it's not what happens, and it's still in progress. And thank you, Owen, for that. We obviously had many roadblocks and found some solutions on the way. That first cycle was interesting because the first plenary we presented the tool set, and like these examples were sparse. The coding bootcamp allowed people to create like really clear, like the composers were really opinionated, and they were there for that reason. So that was really a good bash in our interface assumption. But the one thing that was important for me from the outset is to capture the learning process, because the motto was you only learn once for the first time. And that's really important when you want to pass on knowledge in an enabling way, is to remember what you cannot remember what it is to not know something. So it's important to document it as you go. And finally, the third plenary, we got a gig and we went public with the first tool set and everyone was happy. But in secret, we were working on the second tool set at that moment, which gives us the second cycle where we actually started to have that second tool set with very rough example and rough interface. We did another coding bootcamp, but it had to be online because of COVID. And then the last plenary was supposed to be the gig, but again online because of COVID again. But we managed to kind of plow through and get that, and eventually presented at ICMC the public beta last year of the full tool set, and that was fun. But if we spread what's happened for real between these elements, is that the example folder started to where I told you about the weekly geekery, a list of frictions and brainstorm of tasks was really important in these code. Like we got to a point where the alpha community was really clear about what they disliked, to the point of irritation for us. But that's great, that's part of the game. And we had some, we built some help. A second, we tried to take a composing break for us as the coding team, because I noticed that we started to lose empathy towards our users. So I said, okay, pause, let's be user for 4 months. That's the beauty of having a 5-year project. We were able to take a whole in the kind of production method, or to change role, to change hat. And that was really instrumental to some of the decisions that we took after. And then, we in final year, we had 2 new hires because Gérard got a full-time job elsewhere, so left the project. Hopefully, like most of the code base was done in terms of his part, and we were able to focus on our research and dissemination. And we gave a first workshop in Edinburgh with Owen, and it was a beautiful car crash. The people liked it, but we noticed how much work there was left to do on this. So what's happened in the final year to make sure that we build on all of these iterative design is we ran workshops, 50 of them, from 2-hour long to 5-day long, mostly in academic settings, but also in independent research centers and community-based coding groups, which was fun. And what we have so far at the moment as the present is a YouTube channel, which has the 11 artist presentations from the beginning. So all the case studies, the composer who were commissioned have presented themselves there. We have 6 first commission, 8 second commission. We have for each of those work, the composers were requested, the musicians were requested to articulate how they use the tool set, the subsets of the tool set, the technology, the thinking. So the practice research is documented there, including their biases. We have the 8 keynotes of people we invited, which are all online again. And we have the second version of an 8-step tutorial to get into our world in Max and SC. And I've got to finish the PD one. And we have also 9 podcasts of people who didn't use FluCoMa, but were in the same ecosystem of questions and implementations, because it was important. If they are important and inspiring for us and challenging, and we try to connect to them, sharing questions was important. So there's a discourse. We have 406 users, of which a good 2/3 are active in terms of reading. We also have like unique anonymous visit per day of 120. That's not much, but it's enough for us to feel that there is something. There's a GitHub repo, obviously, with a lot of repos, but the code is all there. There's nothing hidden apart from basic maintenance and papers. And we have binaries. We did a lot of versions, but now we are public version 1.0.4. And there is a learning ecosystem. So the Learn version 2 is online, and there's help and reference version 3, which is all available and disseminated. And finally, what we did is that giving 50 workshops, we thought would be interesting to share the evolving pedagogical approach to enable people to do this. Because if you remember well, the original question is, how do we enable techno-fluent musicians to use this technology? So we went into groups, we try what we did, and both the teaching and the interface danced together, and we are publishing this material. So it's all available online, the 2-hour to 5-day plan, plus a full term session, plus the agenda behind each of these lessons and ideas of what you can talk about. So all of that is available online. So that's about the present. So now, if I have one paper to talk about the future, that makes no sense, obviously. But it's time for us to evaluate and take stock, because as of today, right now, exactly right now, Owen is the only full-time member of the team. Everyone else is finished. I'm 0.1 and everyone else is gone. So it's time to think and see where we go forward. So there are 2 critical reflection strands at the moment that I've seen emerge. The first one is music technology as interdisciplinary fields, plural. And that was born out of I was requested to do the SMC 20 keynote, which is online if you're interested, but starting to think about the beautiful mess of practice research in music technology. And eventually that led to an invitation to Kermit's 10th anniversary or 20th anniversary. I can't remember how old it is. But I reflected critically on FluCoMa and how reality of interdisciplinary research on a very focused project, very intense, how does it work? And just to give you a little hunch, because my time is running out, these are my favorite slides from it. So what is needed for ID, curiosity beyond your field's epistemic foundation, radical empathy. These are things I talked about for half an hour, so hopefully it's going to be online. My cheeky one, everyone thinks that they know what music is, and everyone is mostly an incompetent music technologist. And the general question of our field, or assessing the hegemonic impact of privileged Western patriarchal assumptions. So that was interesting in terms of discussions. So I hopefully will be able to share that with you fully at one point. But I'm a bit hard on our field and a bit complimentary on our project. And obviously, Owen's got a paper coming where he's going to try to bring the cultural politics back into looking at very zoom out of the project and look at it from a critical theory perspective. And look at our tool set as a cultural production in and of itself. And the second strand I think is interesting is code production as research, which in effect, my all 22 minutes of talk so far have been an introduction to Owen's fantastic PPIG talk next week, which is entitled Architecture About Dancing, Creating a Cross-Environment, Cross-Domain Framework for Creative Coding Musicians. You can imagine, with all these beautiful tensions and objective and ambitions that we had, it was hard to create real-life, musician-ready, gig-ready code that would actually work across all these environments and beyond. So he's suffered so much from it. He's made a full paper about it. And what are the big unknowns right now? But only time will tell, as we say. But will it survive the end of funding cliff, which is very soon? It is the toolbox ecosystem, but it is also the code base. It is beyond the code, the foundational ideas and conclusions that we had, and the forum and the sub-community of shared interest and practice. And if I can dream about something, will it expand and or blossom and or mutate? Now, only time will tell. And hopefully we'll be able to bring different critical people to this exciting party. So what's the future? I don't know. Thanks.
Great. Thanks very much. Lots to unpack there, I think. I really like the everyone was it mostly incompetent music technologist?
That's it.
Yeah, that makes me feel a lot better about being an incompetent music technologist. There's lots coming out of that from a methodological perspective at the end there, particularly in terms of evaluation and that kind of thing. I think that's something we can probably get into quite a lot, dovetailing with some of the things going on in the chat during that, following on from Alan's talk as well. We could potentially come back to that in the second half, and or if anyone wants to charge in, pick up on some of that now. But I'm just looking to the chat for questions because I see some. But if anyone has one as well, they can put their hand up.
There's a lot of chat comments. Yeah, I'm trying to catch up now.
So I'm seeing a direct question from Paul Stapleton. Do you want me to read that out, Paul, or are you happy to read that one yourself, as you prefer? Okay, I'll go for it. So he says, I really like your artifacts as ear training point early on in your presentation, as I'm a believer that creative musicians are abusers rather than users of technologies. This leads me to the question, in what ways does FluCoMa amplify the materiality of its artifacts?
Amplify the materiality. I think there are different ways there. So first, not hiding it is already something. A lot of these algorithms are unavailable in the commercial world because they're tamed, and the ones that are available in the creative coding environment are rarely presented in their non-shiny. Like if you look at a paper that presents HPSS, for instance, they will play all these wonderful DSP papers. They tend to give you the one example that works. And I've made a very clear effort, and Owen has definitely helped me, his musical tastes, in demoing in help files and in examples the edge cases. But it also goes like we taught like people who teach in very prestigious university, I won't name anyone, but explaining FFT and its artifact. Like it's obvious for anybody who's done science, but some people use FFT actively in their practice for 20, 25 years and still haven't heard like the proper art, like having ways of, so having these parameters modulatable, for instance, demonstrated in modular, is enabling people to literally noodle around and hear. And that is quite powerful. If you have an HPSS and you can change the filter size, but you can also change you can change the filter size, you can change the FFT in real time, you can change all of these things in real time, and you can start to have a feeling, a musical, intuitive, and based on your taste and ear training, that kind of dialogue is really possible with these algorithms, which are usually optimized away from these kind of edge cases. I don't know if that answers your question, but all of these kind of examples showing. So if you look at the help file of the sign, which is in effect a real-time version of Spear, the software Spear, you'll see the second pane. I'm actually making a gliss, a sine wave gliss, and I amplify the artifact. And I say, look, if you have a steady thing, it's easy. But because it's frame-based, you'll have to approximate for each frame what is the fundamental and reconstructing that. So you can hear like, it's beautiful sound. I will use it in a piece. But that's a specific example to showcase to a musician without going into the maths necessarily. What are the limits and the affordances of the edge case of the algorithms?
Yeah, that's a really interesting answer. Yeah. We probably have just a couple of minutes for questions, but anyone have any more questions specific to Pierre Alexandre's talk? Just combing the chat as well.
Well, just a quick sort of meditative question. A thing that really struck me in Pierre's talk was when he was talking about the techno-fluency. And of course, the thing that in this area, it's easy for anybody to be an expert in one particular thing, but there's so many interacting things that we're all at different levels of techno-fluency on different things that matter. And I'm thinking about lessons for this is just thinking about how we take this forward, because in CHIME, as Tom was saying, one of the things we want to do in future, as things get a bit past the original COVID reaction, is we want to have some physical days where people can do things, especially, for example, PhD students, you know, who aren't, for example, down in London, shall we say, you know, PhD students who, and researchers who are more distributed, and trying to think of how we would focus such days so that we're not just focusing on narrow expertise, but it's not much of a question, but I'm just kind of meditating on how we take advantage of that vision, that picture you've got of everybody being a mixture of techno-fluencies and how everyone can,
I think the model I would use, and I don't know if it would work, but that's my hunch, is if you bring somebody who's a specialist in one of those fields with the agenda of bringing everyone in the room there. So for instance, if you talk with no assumptions and no maths. So the idea is literally, if you're talking to musicians, they will technically care about listening somehow. And they might care, like if you're doing HCI, there will be some interface encoding, but trying to bring them, and if the take home today is, you know, as we just talked about, artifact as ear training, but starting with, okay, this is your algorithm, it sounds great, you press this button, this is the commercial, but then bringing to showcasing the meta methods. So the meta cognition. So you show examples of how they fail, but you also explain how you got to find those liminal space and what interface you've implemented to be able to access those as part of your creative practice. Because if you have access to those in the 75th file down there in your Python environment, you're not going to jam with it. It's not going to happen. It's not going to be a musical affordant element. It's there, but it's not there. And where it is in the code, its level, how is it going to bubble up is a question that is the take-home message of that day, maybe. And that's what I try to reply when I reply to Paul there, is if you care about this, then you're going to spend energy that way. And hence the radical empathy of my conclusion at Kermit. It's like people come to these tables, as you said, like everyone's got their own vision of what musicking is and what they know well, what they think they know well. The amount of, I've been a paid ignorant for 5 years. I'm really good at other things, but in this project, this was at the very edge. The idea for me was platforming. I tried before, I worked with Catart, I worked with Demo, great work. I couldn't get to import this body of knowledge of machine listening and machine learning at a critical level within my techno-fluency, which, you know, I've 25 years of professional practice as a critical music technologist. I've got like mastering level listening skills. So my skills are elsewhere. How can I just say, don't reply to me, just go learn it, because the learning curve is too steep and I don't need to be able to manually compute my FFT to hear its artifact and use it. And so it's about these networks of priorities that we need to acknowledge. But I think that would be the way to teach it, is to have as many perspective on things and then going from a specific example to the meta example. And candor, like when you don't know something, you just don't know, and that's okay.
Nice.
Any other questions for PA?
Alex McLean had his hand raised twice so far.
Yeah, I've just been kind of trying to formulate a question around the kind of what you ended on, really, around community, sort of introducing this amazing software with an amazing team of people, and then being unsure what happens next. I guess in a way that's quite exciting, but it's also quite worrying, like what happens to this software we make. Is that a big concern for you?
It is.
How
but at the same time, yeah, sorry,
it's become popular, it's never been an aim to actually make it a community bit software. It's the community's kind of taken it on itself. So what agency do you actually have in that aspect of community forming and the kind of when the software gets its own life? How do you see that?
So 3 ways. The first one is to acknowledge my biases. So I go, so it's open like the funding requires it to be, but it's open in its essence and its heart too. So it's not open on, so from the beginning, the bias are clear. We're open. We have iteratively asked for feedback. It's been, so we've seeded in those communities ways in as well. We've invited people. Now, if they don't come to the party, there's not much I can do, but at least I've made my house open, clean, and welcoming. We spend a lot of time doing that. It is any of you've written software documentation and try to make stable software that resists people bashing them, know how time consuming these things are. And this is exactly what Owen will talk about in his PPIG paper next week, is all these tensions cost him, and it's energy. Like obviously if I'd followed my let's call it the privileged geek instinct, I would have had a lot more algorithms in the tool set, because I want a new toy. I have not discovered a new bit of equipment or toy or algorithm in the last 2 years. The only thing I've done as a researcher is to, how can I make the most diverse number of people engage with this thing and try things and push against it, and oops, it crashes there. let's fix that bit. It's sometimes very concrete to be an inviting person, but you've hosted a party. Like it's the same thing as hosting a party. So you've got to be available to as a host, and we've done that. And that's why my question is, post funding, I've done everything to platform as I could, including saying all the time I don't know to people who are much more knowledgeable. Owen and Gérard were a lot more knowledgeable than me on the subject of my own research. So they taught me and retaught me, and that process of being candid about what I don't understand has been very good for the project, very hard on me, maybe, and hard on their patients too. But that's, again, ways of building community. If people can come in from music, from example code, from C++, from, that's what you can do, and blow on that flame and try to use it. But there's not much more I can do. I would redesign the project very differently. If it was allowed, I would do a project with the current tool set just in community building for 5 years, just to see how we can go about and bringing new questions by sharing methods and tools. That would be my thing. And try to see, we talked about the global south, where there's class issues in our community, like there are sexist issue in our community. There's a lot of issues in the music technique community of diversity. So how can we go out there and talk to DJs or a dubstep maker, or there's a lot of people out there making music with technology that would have a different vision of what a corpus is. Like going back to very concrete thing, because don't forget, it's a tool set that is specifically for large sound bank manipulation. How do they see that beyond, like, I want my bass drums in one corner and my snare in another corner, which is kind of a solved problem with some freeware out there. Like when you want to go beyond this, how do you want to engage musically with your sounds or your states or your, so that I think the question is just starting, in effect. Like, so I'm excited, but I don't think there is any funding out there for this kind of continuation thing, but we'll see. Hopefully some people will. We had lots of very good feedback from communities around starting to use it. That's why we started to share the teaching material as well, like going meta. So you might disagree with the structure plan, but at least we tell you what we want to do and we do it this way. So you can just, take bits that you care about and use that as a way to create your own approach to this. I hope that answers a bit.